It's natural for most of us to feel some sort of nostalgia for the past. We know times were harder then, but we like to imagine an early innocence, a time when values were simpler and more enduring, when pleasures were richer, and the pace of life was altogether gentler. The quiet pre-industrial world and our own world of speed and clamour are indeed centuries apart. And yet, not all of the pleasures of the past have been lost. There are still some elements of our lives that link us directly with it and confirm a continuity that, superficially, seems unlikely. The seasons are the same, of course, human nature is the same, and there are even some companies which have managed to fit with equal success into the pastoral patterns of earlier days and into the frantic accelerations of today, drawing stable traditional values from the past and continuing them in some seemingly unlikely contexts. Part of the fascination of the story of J&J Crombie Limited, the company whose name is synonymous with fine woolen and cashmere cloths, is that the name and the products are found both in a Britain at war with Napoleon and in the fashionable capitals of the world on the edge of the 21st century. In fact, their presence is evident in many other contrasting and unpredictable places. In their determination to supply high-quality materials, they have recognized few limits, chronological or geographical. Weaving was part of Aberdeen's history as long ago as 1222. In fact, by the time Union Street was first laid down, the town was being run by weavers. And that's when the Crombie story starts. It's 1805, the year of Trafalgar and the death of Nelson. The Napoleonic Wars have stopped supplies of cloth from the French weavers, but demand for it is still strong. So, in partnership with 3 Aberdeen merchants, John Crombie sets up business at Cothall Mills. The timing and opportunism of the company's foundation will be repeated many times over in the years to come. In those early days, for example, John Crombie showed that he not only knew about weaving, but also about marketing. He took samples of his mill's products and made the long and dangerous journey to London on horseback to introduce the capital's tailors to the fine Scottish cloths in which he had such faith. On the way, he'd stop at mills in Yorkshire to learn of any new developments in the industry, and even at times to recruit the best of their people to travel back north with him to be managers in his own enterprise. One of the London tailors he supplied was James Locke, whose customers included Queen Victoria and her consort. It was one of Locke's clerks who once misread an order and, instead of calling the weave tweel, which was its correct name, he mistakenly baptized it with the name we still use, tweed. John Crombie's commitment and determination, along with the fact that the products were of the highest quality, ensured that the Aberdeen mills prospered. In the Great Exhibition at the Crystal Palace in 1851, his cloths won many prizes. And by 1859, the business had outgrown the mills at Cothall and moved to the Granham Mills. The spare capacity was needed because whatever history came up with, from wars to depressions, from Georgian restraint to Edwardian elegance, from civil strife to sporting fashions, Crombie's products were always a part of what was happening. The Aberdeen Mill connected the American Civil War and fashionable European weddings, the 2 world wars and grouse shooting on the moors, army greatcoats and fine cashmere. You see, the US textile trade was based in the north, and the Confederate Army had no mills of their own, so they turned to Crombie to provide their rebel grey cloth. Grey was also the fashionable colour in Europe in the great days of the clippers, when shipwrights were said to have fine coats with guinea pieces for buttons. The demand for Crombie's cloth spread through Europe and into Russia. But then the Great War came with its new imperatives, and Crombie were asked to supply millions of yards of material for uniforms. In fact, a tenth of all officers' greatcoats were made from Crombie cloth. In 1926, only 23 years after the Wright brothers made their first powered flight, Crombie showed that they'd retained their founders' enterprise and adventure when they became the first pioneers of air travel for business purposes. And they needed all their confidence when the Depression of the 30s choked off demand for most manufactured products. Undeterred, the company maintained the positive attitude that had already brought it through so many different eras. Rather than agonize over the fallen demand, they took the chance to plan for the future. They built a new weaving shed, a pillarless building designed to let in more light and nicknamed the Sun Shop. A very apt choice when you think that way back, the name Granum itself started as Grianum, Temple of the Sun. World War II was the unfortunate impetus which regenerated all industries. In specific terms, that meant 268,398 overcoats from Crombie, and by 1941, they were producing about 500 miles of cloth a year. That's about the distance between Aberdeen and London. And the story of success has continued. In 1960, Crombie was one of the largest tweed producers in the UK. It has spanned incredible extremes. Its presence, like thread running through the textures of one of its weaves, is a constant through the major changes of the last 2 centuries. The part played by tradition and dependability is clear, but equally clear is the degree of enterprise which has helped it through so many different phases of development. Now, for a company to survive and indeed thrive through so many periods and in so many places, it must be doing something right. So, what actually goes on at Granum? The answer is a complex one. Wools from the world's primary markets are bought in and sorted before they start on a series of processes which will open them, clean them, and prepare them for dyeing. Maintaining consistency of shades through the dyeing process is critical. Samples of the various lots are compared, and the wool is weighed and layered accordingly to create the maximum evenness of tone. Then comes the carding, a process which opens up the blend and lays the fibres parallel for spinning. The work of the shuttleless looms makes description difficult and, luckily, superfluous. Their transformation of the yarn into the complex patterns of the woven article by means of 300 crossings each minute is a combination of art, music, and magic. And there are still other stages to be completed. Raising, steaming, and subsequent processing are all essential to produce the characteristic Crombie finish. And all the time, of course, quality is under close scrutiny. The roots, traditions, and principles laid down in 1805 are still very much a part of the fabric of the company. But Crombie also belongs to the modern world and continues to move with it. Its individuality is intact. The charm and quality of its products still gives them a unique edge, and they're consolidating the company's presence in a fast competitive context. Granum is now Scotland's largest woolen mill. More than half the total production of fabrics and scarves is exported. Their product range is varied and includes wool, cashmere, lightweight tweeds, silk wool cloths, and lamb's wool yarns. Their design team is constantly on the move, visiting Europe, the USA, and the Far East to monitor trends and needs. And if you like the more offbeat statistics, how about this? In just 1 year, they kneaded the hair from 100,000 goats to fulfill the requirements of cashmere. The yarn they manufacture would stretch to the moon and back 8 times. And if you stacked up the bales of wool they use, the heap would reach higher than Everest. And the company continues to evolve. At last they put their name not only to fine cloths, but also to a particular range of clothing. In the 80s, a collection of knitwear and tailored outerwear for men and women was introduced to a public which had long been using the name Crombie to describe not just the cloth, but the garment from which it was made. Now there really is such a thing as a Crombie coat, and like all their other products, it's winning awards. The vision, expansion and enterprise of Crombie today seem on the surface to have taken them a long way from their beginnings in Aberdeen almost 2 centuries ago. But that's just an illusion. In fact, they're only continuing the style adopted in those years after Trafalgar and Waterloo by their founder. He too knew that he had something that was worth giving to the world, and he didn't stop to wonder where his horizons were.